I never thought I'd be in the middle of family drama over inheritance money, but here I am. It all started when my wife's grandmother passed away last year. The whole situation has turned into such a mess that I can't help but wonder if I'm partly to blame. My wife and I have always had a great relationship with her parents and her sister. We'd often visit them, share meals, and everything was peaceful until the inheritance situation unfolded. Looking back, I can see how things started falling apart piece by piece. A few weeks ago, I hosted a barbecue for my sister's birthday. We didn't invite my wife's sister and her husband since the two sides of our families had never really mixed before. My wife mentioned the barbecue to her sister later, who commented about how much they always enjoyed the leftovers from our cookouts. Being thoughtful, my wife offered to pack them a box of food. That's when I first noticed something was off. Every time we visited my wife's parents after that, we'd see my sister-in-law's cars parked in the lay-by outside. It seemed strange, but I didn't think much of it initially. My father-in-law explained that her husband would park there each night, walk home, get his wife's car, drive back, and then walk home again. He'd do the whole routine in reverse each morning. When asked, he claimed they had parking issues at their place. Yesterday, when everyone gathered in my in-laws' garden, both their cars were parked in the lay-by again. I casually asked why they needed two cars, and her husband insisted that parking was really difficult where they lived, which I knew wasn't true. He explained he'd rather park where he knew there would be space, even though it meant walking there, taking a car home, and then driving everyone back. My wife suggested they try to squeeze up their cars since it would be easier for us with our baby and toddler, rather than crossing the road. But her brother-in-law refused, saying, "You couldn't fit 3 cars there." My sister-in-law made a cryptic comment about not being nice when something's used up before you get yours, but we didn't understand what she meant at the time. That evening, everything exploded. My wife got a text from her sister saying we had badly upset them, and the car situation was some sort of payment. We were completely confused until we learned it all traced back to their grandmother's inheritance. Her will was outdated and had originally set aside money for both sisters to get driving lessons. Since they both already knew how to drive, their father split the money equally between them, about £10,000 each. For us, it was a blessing. We had a fairly new car, but used the money to trade up to a proper family vehicle. We had £1,800 left over, which we decided to give back to my father-in-law. What we didn't know was that he then gave that money to my sister-in-law. That's when things got complicated. My sister-in-law and her husband had done the math. We got £8,000 from Grandma, plus £18,800 from our car trade-in, while they only received £12,200 total. They believed all the money should have gone into one pool and then been split equally, instead of them getting what they saw as our leftovers. I had no idea at the time, but they started viewing everything we did as an insult. Even the barbecue leftovers we sent became a sore point. My sister-in-law called them table scraps and said it was insulting. The whole situation came to a head when we went to my in-laws to talk about it. Before going in, I whispered to my wife, asking if she was going to explain that her sister was being greedy. Unfortunately, my sister-in-law was in the garden and overheard me. She started shouting, demanding to know what I'd called her. The situation got so tense that I grabbed our dog and walked home. My wife texted me later asking if I wanted her to tell her sister I was sorry. I replied with haha no, which, looking back, definitely wasn't helpful. My wife wasn't impressed with my response. The more I learned about the situation, the more I realized how many misunderstandings had piled up. My father-in-law had spent months trying to honor his mother's wishes after she passed. She was 94 when she died, and had always been clear about not wanting to go into a nursing home. My father-in-law had driven 110 miles round trip 2 or 3 times a week for at least 10 years to help her stay independent. In the last few months of her life, he went every day, except when my work travel allowed me to check in so he could have a break. He found a notebook that was part diary, part will, and spent months trying to figure out what his mother would have wanted. He gave both families £8,000 initially, splitting it so each person got £2,000, including our unborn daughter. This became another point of contention, as my sister-in-law and her husband believed we had pressured him into including our future child. When our daughter was born, my father-in-law gave her a £1,000 check, as he had done for all his grandkids. I made what I thought was a light-hearted comment about her being the richest baby in all the land, but they took it as gloating. The car money came from an investment account with about £20,000 that their grandmother had specifically set aside for driving lessons and cars for both sisters. We spent our share on upgrading our car and returned the excess, feeling it honored her wishes without taking advantage of my father-in-law, who was retired. He even tried to give away the money from selling her bungalow, but we all stopped him. What I didn't know was that my sister-in-law's family had been struggling financially. When the family went on a 3-week holiday to Italy, paid for by money their grandmother had set aside specifically for a family trip, they couldn't come because my brother-in-law had just started his own business. They had to ask for their share in cash instead, because they needed the money. When we sent postcards and brought back gifts, we were unknowingly rubbing salt in the wound. Everything I learned later made me realize how my actions, though unintentional, had added to their stress. When COVID hit, my brother-in-law told me he'd quit his job in February to start his own business. I said, "Oh, bad timing," meaning it was tough luck with the pandemic, but they took it as criticism of his business decision. I really wasn't judging. I know nothing about his industry, but the damage was done. The leftovers situation got worse when my father-in-law jokingly used that term while giving them the extra money we'd returned. I never used that phrase myself, but the damage was done. My sister-in-law later told my wife they couldn't afford what we got, a Kia Sportage, and I feel awful because I did drive over specifically to show it off. I even called her husband on my way home, excited about having my first new car. I genuinely didn't know about their money problems, but looking back, I can see how insensitive it was. During lockdown, I thought I was helping by giving them our laptop and printer so their kids could do schoolwork. But when her husband bought some games that wouldn't run on it because it wasn't a gaming PC, it caused another fight. When my sister-in-law texted asking how old the laptop was, I replied 2 years, which she took as another leftovers situation. I hadn't realized there was an argument going on at their home about it. I made things worse when I found our old Xbox 360 and Wii in the cupboard and passed them on. Their family isn't big on technology, and I didn't know they'd see it as another handout. During a family Zoom call, I joked with their son about only giving him the Xbox so we could talk about Skyrim for hours. After the call, he told his parents I'd said I gave the Xbox to him personally, not the family, which sparked another argument. Even my love for cooking became a source of tension. I always make extra food at barbecues to share with family and friends, and I label these boxes as leftovers, so nobody feels awkward taking them. The boxes from my sister's birthday party each had half a chicken, ribs, sausages, and a steak skewer. When I dropped them at my in-laws, I wrote "lovely leftovers" on my sister-in-law's box, not realizing how it would look after everything else. My wife spent the afternoon talking with her sister and stayed at her mom's to talk more. It turns out my sister-in-law had been uncomfortable bringing up these issues, and her husband started parking their cars that way, hoping my wife would notice and they could talk about it. But we hadn't paid attention, and they thought we were deliberately ignoring it. Looking back at it all, I can defend each individual thing I said or did. But when you put it all together, it looks pretty awful. People tell me I'm not at fault, and while that's comforting, the fact remains that my sister-in-law and her husband have been arguing for months, and they can trace every argument back to something I said or did. Even if I didn't know about their situations or arguments, my words still caused pain. It reminds me of something my own granddad once said after I accidentally dropped something on his head. Just because it was an accident doesn't mean it didn't hurt. I need to accept that I've caused a lot of pain, whether I meant to or not. My wife hasn't even mentioned my name-calling from this morning. I guess we've got bigger issues to sort out now. I'm starting to understand that, being thick-skinned myself, I often brush off potentially offensive things with a "they probably didn't mean it like that" attitude. But not everyone thinks this way. And my big mouth has gotten me in trouble before. This time, though, it's affected an entire family's relationships, and that's something I need to work on fixing. One step at a time.